Hey, this is Danny here from Podcast Stories. Thanks so much for listening, and I'd love for you to get the latest episodes when they're released. So make sure to follow on your favourite podcast app or hop on over to podcasterstories.com/listen. If you enjoy the show and want to support it, you can do that at podcasterstories.com/support to join other supporters just like you. Thanks so much for being part of the Podcaster Stories community. And now, here's this week's episode. Hi, and welcome to Podcaster Stories. Each show we'll have a conversation with podcasters across all mediums and share their story, what motivates them, why they started their show, how they grew their show, and more. We'll also talk about their personal lives and some of the things that have happened that have made them the person they are today. And now, here's your host, Danny Brown. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Podcaster Stories, where we take you behind the scenes to talk to the people behind the voices of the shows we listen to. Today I've got someone that I've known online for about, 10 years now, maybe more, and that's Bob Dunn, who I've known from the WordPress community and the blogging community, and now Bob's move over to the podcasting community. So we're going to talk about that move in his show today. So Bob, thanks for being on the show. I'm going to hand it over to you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your show.
Really appreciate it, Danny. Yeah, it's been I think it's been a good decade, and we've been through a lot of them, a lot of the interesting ups and downs in the industry. So glad to be on here. Yeah, I'm known kind of in the WordPress space as BobWP, and my site BobWP.com. I have a podcast called Do the Woo Podcast, and what it's focused on is WooCommerce, which is, if you're not familiar with WordPress, it's an e-commerce, probably the most popular e-commerce plugin for WordPress to build an online store and to sell online. And that kind of transpired over a period of time how I got to this point, because to be honest, I think I'm at number 7 or 8 in the number of podcasts I've done.
Right. And I was going to ask you about that because obviously, as you mentioned, BobWP, so WP short for WordPress, and your main site is BobWP.com. So you started off in blogging and sort of, as you mentioned, moved more towards the podcasting medium. What have you found has been the biggest difference between, say, written word and spoken word?
That's interesting because I was actually not inspired, but I thought about podcasting as far back as 2009 because I had a couple colleagues that were into it, and it just didn't seem to fit at the time. It's doing blogging, the whole thing, but I was like, no. So in 2014, I actually started my first one. And since then, I think it's just for me, it's another medium. It's another tool to get your content out there. If I have a preference of what I really enjoy doing, I enjoy podcasting, but I always enjoy writing first. And I'm reaching a different audience, of course. I think that's why, a lot of us do this, because there is a different audience. Personally, as weird as it sounds, I'm not a huge fan of podcasts because I'm more of a visual. I like to read rather than auditory. So it's just, I think it's just, there's a lot of differences. There's a lot of preferences people have. And I mean, I've talked to a lot of people that, they listen to podcasts all the time. Other people that just, I won't touch them just because they don't work for me. So I guess my observation is really, it's another tool. It's like when video came in and video is all big and everything. It's just another way to communicate, and it gives a different feel. There really is something different than even watching a person and watching them talk versus just hearing them talk. And that, I think it brings out more of the personality of the individual, and you seem to be more focused on what they're actually saying rather than watching them, especially if they're, try to be rather entertaining on the video. You're getting you're interpreting that message differently. And I think that's something that's unique that podcasting brings, is that audio only. I mean, it's like radio. We've been, it's been around forever. And how many of us have grew up or lived on radios or whatever that was, and it's still, in a sense, is still an important piece of our culture. So I think it just, I think it just brings a different perspective to content, just being audio only.
And I think to your point about being visual creatures, I think it was Bob Reed who was on last week's show that I was speaking to. He'd mentioned that his sweet spot for like a podcast to listen to, for example, would be about 20, 30 minutes, because people tend to, you can switch off and have it on in the background, do your workout, go grocery shopping, whatever you want to do, as opposed to having to concentrate on, a video that you have to physically watch or written word that you have to have your eyes focused on. And I think maybe to your point, that's definitely where the differences of the audiences come in and how they prefer to consume the content.
Yeah, and I think just like you said, it's how you can do it and when you can do it. I mean, we found, another way to fill a gap, whether it's commuting, whether it's, cleaning your house, whatever you're doing. This gives you the opportunity, if that's your style, to listen to some content, to, whether it's educational or entertaining or whatever it may be.
Now, you'd mentioned that you've had about 7 or 8 podcasts now, or this is your now about 7th or 8th, and your first podcast was back in 2014. So what was that first podcast and why that particular show or that particular topic?
I think I forced myself into it. It was called WP Breakdown, and I thought it was real clever because it was a short talking head podcast. I'd talk for like 10 or 15 minutes about some plugins or something like that. And I thought, well, that's really clever. It's like WP Breakdown. I'm breaking down the plugin, but a lot of us have a breakdown when we're working on WordPress. So, I mean, in my mind, that was it. And I don't know whether anybody interpreted it that way or not. I did it just to get my feet wet in it. It was like, finally, I'm ready to do this. I'm ready to dive in. And I did it for about 12 or 14 months. And it really was, when I look back on it, it was really a lame podcast. And I'd be totally honest, I don't even know how many people I had listening to it, but I felt like I was just regurgitating what I was writing about. Right. And even though it is a different medium, it wasn't exciting I mean, it doesn't have to be exciting, but it was like, what am I talking about this stuff? I write about it. It's like blah, blah, blah. And finally I just said, I'm stopping this podcast because I need to find something else. I need to find something that clicks with me. And I'm not going to say that's going to happen in 2 months or a year or whatever. It took about a year before I started another one again. But that one was just, I mean, it was fine. It got me used to it and understanding it. And it also helped me to understand that I think I want to do more interview style. I don't want to be the talking head because I'm really not sure if I'm able to capture an audience for a long amount of time by myself. I mean, I was, really questioning myself, even realistic, or is this, something people want to listen to? And if a few people, when I quit, they were bummed. They said, enjoyed it. Well, that's great. We're going to move on. So I ended that one then.
And I completely understand that. I sunsetted my own personal podcast the last couple of weeks to concentrate on this one because, to your point, I was doing it just as a sole person. Now and again, I'd have people on to talk with, but primarily it was my sole person or myself. And I wasn't enjoying it as much. I was always questioning, well, do I want to talk about this topic, that topic, etc. And I find this format, I enjoy the interviews, the chats much more than doing it myself. And I find this format, to your point, a lot more, entertaining and a lot more fun for me to take part in as well.
Yeah, and I think you kind of find that groove too. It's like when I've talked to people about podcasts, I said, I've had a lot of people that have come back to me, said, I love your interviews with me, or the interview you did with me. You made me feel comfortable. We had a good conversation. You're a good interviewer. And I didn't consider myself, some good interviewer. It was like I didn't have experience in that. But on the other hand, I thought, okay, maybe I found that sweet spot, and this is what works best for me.
Now, you'd mentioned obviously that you concentrate now on WooCommerce, which is the e-commerce, the primary e-commerce platform for WordPress. When you moved over to that, because I know you started doing that first on your blog, you moved to talking a lot more about WooCommerce as opposed to WordPress in general. So when you launched the podcast, were you ever concerned it could be too niche because it was very specific to an e-commerce plugin, or did you find that like maybe a bonus and that was an opportunity to own that niche then?
Yeah, that's interesting because when I started the podcast up again after that first one, and that was in 2016, I decided to start. It was actually the Do the Woo podcast. And I started it as niche down to WooCommerce. After about 7 months, I thought, I don't know if I want that much of a focus right now. I don't know if it's right. So I switched it over to the WP e-commerce show to talk about all e-commerce on WordPress. So it kind of opened up a lot more. And I ran that for 4 years as that particular podcast up till this last March. And I ended it. But then I got in my turmoil of, I'm going to try this podcast. I'm going to do this podcast. I decided to bring Do the Woo back. And I had brought a co-host in, and we were doing it twice a month. And I was doing it simultaneously with the other e-commerce podcast. And it came to a point where my whole site, and a lot of what I determined when I would, decide on a podcast is, this is my business. My website is my business. Publishing is my business. So it's got to fit into my business. And it can't always be, I just want to do it because it's cool or it's fun. So I looked at WooCommerce and the direction my site was going and made some changes, talked to a lot of people, and thought, okay, WooCommerce is back on the front plate. And some people did come to me and say, boy, you seem to be putting things all in one basket. And I said, I've pivoted a lot over these last 13 years since I used WordPress, and I can pivot again if need be. But right now, that is a sweet spot. So there was never really any concern. I think it was the growth and building my site around that WooCommerce audience. The podcast just seemed natural. So the more I talked to people and the more opportunities I saw to talk to people as guests on the show versus back when I first started it was a little harder to find people kind of deeper into WooCommerce. They were more available now. And it was almost just a natural segue that fit for the entire model I was creating. And as a result, even I've started just this last 2-3 weeks ago, I was doing a Woocommerce Roundup. And I decided that, why don't I make that a little podcast too? It's just another way to get it out there for somebody who'd rather listen to a 2-3 minute thing than my little news posts that I put up. And so I started that one. So yeah, it never in a long way. It never really was, am I going to be stuck in this? Is this too niche? In fact, I think that's the way to do it now. And if you are going to try to monetize your podcast, you got to niche down unless you're some celebrity in some space that you just automatically have a huge following and people throw money at you.
All right, yeah. And it's funny, the podcast host that I use, they have a weekly call-in, like a live call, where the customers can, ask the biggest questions about podcasting, growing a show, et cetera, And the number one question, rightly or wrongly, is about monetization and when can I do it, how soon, how big, how many downloads, etc. And it was interesting to see the CEO and the founder or co-founder of the platform mention that, it's not, you're all approaching it the wrong way when it comes to monetization. It's about being useful first, providing great content, and then start thinking about what can I get back from this, so to speak.
Right, exactly. And even when I started the Do the Woo, as it was in 2016, I started out the gate saying, I'm going to monetize this thing. And it was risky as far as sponsorships. But I looked at it as, I'm not looking at numbers. I'm not looking at whatever. I'm looking at a niche and I'm looking at my brand. And that's what I'm going to sell it on and see how it goes.
And I mean, you mentioned, I think it's fair to say, Bob, that, like I said, we've known each other for a long time, and I've seen you, to your point about pivoting from, different topics and where your expertise lies. And I think it's pretty safe to say that you're very well respected in both the WordPress and the WooCommerce, arenas. As a user of the platform and as someone that's respected and, shares that expertise either on your blog or your podcast, where do you see WooCommerce going as a platform? Do you ever see it expanding beyond WordPress? Do you think they'll just stay within that market, or what's your take on that?
Boy, that's a good question because it's weird. I'm kind of this, what do you call it? I don't know if any of your listeners can relate to it, but I was talking to somebody the other day about the old 1970s FM disc jockeys that were laid back and would throw on a whole album, and you wouldn't hear from them till they flipped over the side, just merely to tell you to flip over the other side. And they were mellow, and they just kind of flowed with their music. And with WordPress, people are asking me, where do you think it's going? What's the direction of it? And I look at it as, even though it's obviously a huge part of my life, and there is a community that's involved with it, I look at it as this tool that's constantly changing, and I'm just kind of along for the ride, and I change with it. So I'm not real critical of a change. If something really bugged me, or something, if I saw some direction going in the future that wouldn't fit my model anymore, yeah, I would look at, okay, what can I do here? What can I change? What can I tweak? How can I pivot? But I don't really, I don't really know where it's going. I've tried to figure it out, and maybe that's part of the thing I like about technology is I can't predict when I'm involved with any kind of technology where it's going, and it kind of surprises me. And maybe some change kind of freaks me out a little bit initially, like, whoa, I've got to learn this now. But how many times have we had to learn something over and over and over dealing with any kind of technology? So it's kind of a non-answer, because I don't really know what's around the corner, because it's constantly changing, and there's so many, and you kind of look at it from the outside user, and then you look at it from this community that sometimes has its own little bit of turmoil in it, and people are, this is being done, this being done wrong. So I just sit back, and I'm almost like at a movie. I'm just watching what's going on, and I wait for the next scene, and then, okay, well, this was kind of something I didn't expect, but hey, I'm here, I'll deal with it. So I don't even know if that's an answer, but that's how I take it. That's my perspective on even where we're going. It could change to the point where I'm not interested in it anymore, but I don't really see it. And at the age I am, I'm not really in the mood to change either.
No, and that's fair comment. I know I've used a couple of different e-commerce, like WordPress e-commerce plugins over the last 5-6 years maybe, as I've helped my wife and a couple of people get online stores up and running. And I remember there was a couple like Carter66 and ECWID, I think, was another one. Then obviously you got digital downloads, but WooCommerce always seems to be the one that's stuck around. It's actually improvised and expanded their product line, etc. So it'll be interesting to see, who knows, maybe they'll become like the Shopify of WordPress and have their self-hosted. Maybe they do that now. I'm not sure, because I haven't used WooCommerce for a while. Do WooCommerce host sites on their own platform? Is it all?
They've introduced it into WordPress.com. So you can install WooCommerce easily on that, where I don't know, at one point they did that. But I think that's a lot of the prediction, is that there will be some kind of self-hosted WooCommerce platform that WordPress does. And to me, if that's the case, I mean, there's some people, there's pros and cons, everybody has an opinion. To me, I'm thinking, hey, that would probably help a lot of people get online even more and be able to sell online. And they're kind of doing baby steps to that already, how they integrate Jetpack and different other, onboarding experience, and easily they've just created their own Woo payments, and it's a gateway, but they're using Stripe. And the reason they're calling it Woo payments is it's very easy through the onboarding experience when you're setting up. If you set it up through the wizard, if you set up Stripe, you got to go in and grab the API and everything like that, like you would do PayPal in a lot of instances. But this is, you just basically connect, you open up an account on Stripe through their platform, and you're ready to go.
Oh, that's cool. I'll have to check that out. Like I said, I've not used WooCommerce for a little bit, but I do have a project coming up that I will need some form, of payment gateway, payment stroke store. So I'll definitely be checking that out. Now, as someone that's launched between 7 and 8 podcasts over the last 10 years or longer, 15 years, I guess, what would be if there was like one piece of advice that you could give a new podcaster or someone even thinking about coming into the podcasting space, as being a blogger or whatever, what would that be?
It's kind of two-part, and I'll cheat because I'm going to give two, but I'll make them quick. First one is, I always tell people, know what the heck you're going into this for. I mean, why are you starting the podcast? And is it meeting those expectations down the road, reevaluate. And it's simply, if you're starting a podcast to build your brand, to monetize, to just hear yourself talk, if you say, okay, I'm going to start a podcast because I'm going to really enjoy it. This is going to be fun. Well, 5 episodes down the road, are you still having fun? Are you enjoying it? If that's the only reason you're podcasting and you have the time and resources to do it, then great. You've hit it on the spot. But don't just do it to jump on the bandwagon. And you and I have both been through the blogging days where everybody, blogs. Hey, everybody's got to have a blog. Everybody's got to have a blog. Jump on the blogging bandwagon. All these blogs get started, they get abandoned, and the same thing happens with podcasts. So know that and know your limitations, because with all the technical stuff, the post-production, however you decide to do things in producing a podcast, figure out if you're going to have somebody help you or you're going to do it all yourself. Because again, I think that's a big reason people abandon them. They think it's going to be so easy and they haven't found the right tools or the right workflow to make it easier for them, or they haven't reached out to somebody to maybe do, if they need post-production work, maybe they need somebody to do that for them rather than them trying to learn Audacity or GarageBand or, any other audio software. So it's that question of, why are you starting this podcast, and decide what you're going to put into it as far as resources.
No, I think that's a great piece of advice. I know I was just checking Fiverr out the other week there to get some post-production specialists for a client's podcast, because I don't mind doing my own editing and stuff, but when it comes to certain qualities that you need, I do not have them. So I was just checking out Fiverr, and there's a huge industry there for post-production specialists of podcasts, artwork designers, show hosts, marketers, people that will market your podcast and help you grow it. So I think that's a great piece of advice, that know your own weakness or your limitations, and outsource where you can to the people that can do the stuff that you cannot do. Exactly. And that's it. There's that marketing. Those are other things even thrown into the mix that you really got to look at. This isn't just getting on there, talking into your microphone, hitting end, and it's all done. So yeah, I think that's just knowing what you want to do and what you may need help doing. Now, just to swing things around a little bit, we've known each other for a while. We keep saying that. For people that either don't know you or maybe do know you, but is there something that not a lot of people know about you that may surprise them if they found out or if they knew about it? I think a lot of shop. Yeah. Oh, okay. Business wise, I'll give you a personal and a business wise. Business wise, probably people didn't know we had a marketing company like 17 years. My wife and I, Judy, which you know very well, had a marketing company for 17 years in a kind of a suburb of Seattle, a good amount of those years. And one of the things people didn't know is we were actually, we beat out IKEA in a local business awards, which IKEA wasn't really thrilled with. But the Chamber of Commerce in the town we lived, we were up against IKEA and a couple of businesses for community award communities. It was like a business committed to community of the year or something. And we won it over IKEA. So we can actually say we won and beat out IKEA. And we actually were in competition with Boeing for another award, which is really odd to think about, but we of course didn't win that one. And on a personal note, maybe the thing that people don't know, that my very first entrepreneurial job was driving an ice cream truck. And so that was one of those annoying things that go around and play music all the time. I think people kind of know currently every kind of my personality, but I mean, how I am. I'm a very much of a pacifist. I'm very much of a low key, mellow guy, very accepting, water, glass half full type of guy. So, but yeah, business wise, I think people wouldn't know that, and probably there's plenty of things they don't know about me that they're probably glad they don't know. So, That's interesting to hear about IKEA and Bowen. IKEA especially, I can imagine, like the Swedish executives pulling their hair out saying, who's this little mom and pop store that's, that's taking our business away?
And when we were at the award with Boeing, we were just, and again, it was through the school district, and it was businesses committed to kids. And we'd done a lot with the school districts as far as a lot of helping them support and stuff like that. But it was kind of obvious. We just sat there and thought, this is really funny. They even have both of us competing against each other, because realistically, we knew they weren't going to pick us, because it's like Boeing had given them, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars and all this stuff. So it was kind of hilarious. But and in another way, it was kind of nice to hear and these are the finalists, Boeing, and our company name back then was Cat's Eye Marketing. And I thought, well, we got mentioned in the same breath in competition of Boeing. I guess that's a win.
That's pretty cool. You put it up on your website as mentioned in the same breath as Boeing.
Yeah.
Very cool marketing. So, Bob, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I know the listeners are going to get a lot of value and takeaways about podcast and the WooCommerce platform. If they're interested in learning more about you or podcasting or WooCommerce, and because I know you do WooCommerce, I believe you do WooCommerce consulting, correct, or WooCommerce training?
I don't.
You don't know?
What I found is that I used to do a little bit of it, but I'm kind of an expert by osmosis. So I learn from all the people I have on my site, but sometimes I don't really feel like I'm always the best fit to give WooCommerce advice, specifically on, creating your store and stuff. So I have a nice team or band of people that I can refer people to. So I basically just publish and podcast these days.
Okay, so for people that would like to learn more, then, and as you mentioned, you can certainly refer to relevant, based on topics or queries, etc. Where's the best place people can find you online, either website or social, etc.?
BobWP.com is the website, and I'm probably most active on Twitter, which is BobWP. So if you go on any social platform, you can search for me there. If I'm there, that's where you're going to find me.
Awesome. I'll make sure to drop the links to all the platforms, etc., in the show notes. So as mentioned, guys, this has been another episode of Podcaster Stories. I really enjoyed having Bob Dunn on the show today, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to him. Make sure to check the show notes for the links that I'll drop in there, to find Bob where he lives. Well, not where he lives, but where he lives online. I'm not going to send people, especially with the social distancing over at your house. Crazy times. Again, thanks for listening, guys. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to make sure you get the new shows once they're published. You can either find the latest episode on podcasterstories.com or on your favorite podcast app, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Until the next time, take care, and we'll speak soon. You've been listening to Podcaster Stories. If you enjoyed this week's show, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and feel free to leave a review on iTunes to help others find the show too. And we'll see you the next time on Podcaster Stories.